Preston here. I'm back with William Lowe to do another roadmap, and tonight we're going to talk about alternative therapies. This is kind of a broad subject, and it's kind of hard to say where does traditional therapy stop and alternative therapies begin. Is that an alternative therapy, or is that some regular kind of therapy? So I think what we're going to do is, William, you're going to start us off with a little information about e-stim and mirror box therapy. So why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, sure thing. So I think when it comes to recovery after stroke, Ralph, there comes a time in the journey after stroke where you've gotten as much therapy as you possibly can through insurance, but you might find that you're in a place where you might have reached a plateau, or you might notice that you're not seeing changes as quickly as you used to. And I think in every stroke survivor's journey, it's always worthwhile to have a look at alternative things you could do to get the ball rolling in your recovery, especially when it comes to waking up your brain after you've had a stroke, and especially teaching your brain how to send those signals to your muscles like you used to before you had your stroke. So today, what I wanted to do is I wanted to kick off the discussion by talking about two things which I've noticed to have the most benefit in both my own recovery as well as in clients who are personally coached in their recovery. And these two therapies are mirror box therapy and electrical stimulation therapy. So the one I'm the biggest advocate of is electrical stimulation therapy. And the reason why I'm such a huge advocate and such a huge fan of electrical stimulation is because, unlike traditional therapy where therapists might have encouraged you to try and move your limb, electrical stimulation, what it does is it actually uses electricity to directly stimulate and contract the muscles which would have typically been used before you had your stroke to perform the movements which you want to, so that you can teach your brain or retrain your brain how to send those signals which might have been damaged or lost after you had your stroke. And why electrical stimulation works so well is because when you put the electrodes on your arm, or when you put the electrodes on your body and you're contracting the muscles using electricity, what this does is it gives your brain a sense of what it looks like, and especially what it feels like, to perform something which you used to do before you had your stroke. And by giving your brain this feedback and giving your brain this experience of what it feels like and looks like to do something, you're giving your brain the ingredients it needs to I guess, develop that blueprint in the brain and retrain and teach itself how to send those signals to turn on those muscles like it used to before you had your stroke. So that's why I'm a huge advocate of electrical stimulation. And I think in recovery after stroke, the way that your brain learns is through a process which is called experience-dependent plasticity, which basically means that in order for neuroplasticity to happen, your brain has to be immersed in the experience or exposed to the experience of what it looks like and feels like to do things. And I think where traditional therapy fails is when maybe your brain doesn't know how to send the signal to turn on those muscles, and you're just trying to force your brain to move whatever it can to get something done, and not necessarily educating your brain on how to send those signals, or learn how to learn what it feels like and looks like to experience what it actually feels like to actually perform the movement you're trying to learn. And so that's why I think electrical stimulation works really well. Another therapy approach I'm also a big fan of is mirror box therapy. And the reason why I'm a big fan of mirror box therapy is not just because I've seen changes and improvements in my own recovery, but also in other stroke survivors who are personally coached in their journey as well. And why I'm such a big advocate of mirror box therapy is because it does the same thing as electrical stimulation, but only on a budget. Now, the downside of mirror box therapy is that it requires a lot of patience, because essentially mirror box therapy, for those of you who are watching this who haven't heard of it, it requires you having a box with a mirror on the side and putting your affected hand inside the box and trying to trick your brain into thinking it's moving the affected side by looking through a mirror. So you would have a box like this, and basically you would put your hand inside the hole, and on my right side or on my left side, if you're watching this video, you would look at the reflection of your non-affected hand, and you would try and trick your brain into thinking that you were moving your affected hand by trying to match up the signals or mimic the exact same thing you're trying to do with your non-affected hand while you're looking into the mirror. So I'm a big advocate of mirror box therapy because, again, it gives your brain the experience of what it looks like and feels like to perform a movement on the affected side, just like you would with the non-affected side, because you're using your non-affected side as a strong reference point to teach your brain how to actually do something it would have done before your stroke. The research shows that the reason why mirror box therapy works is because it encourages cross communication between both sides of your brain, which basically happened before your stroke. And it was the reason why you were able to do things before your stroke, such as being able to drive and talk at the same time. It's because of that cross communication between both sides. And in recovery after stroke, the research has also shown that when you encourage more cross communication between both sides, you're able to actually recover a lot better, and you're actually able to recover a lot quicker. So that's why I'm a big advocate of mirror box therapy, because one, it gives your brain the experience of what it feels like and looks like to do something you would have done before your stroke by using your non-affected side as a strong reference point, which is very similar to electrical stimulation. But obviously the downside is that you have to look at your hand in the mirror for about half an hour every single day for it to work. Now, why this works is and how I know this works is because when I first tried it for the first time, I tried to teach my brain how to extend my wrist on my left side because I wanted to test if this actually worked. And after doing it for half an hour, what I found was the next morning when I woke up, I was able to perform a little bit of a flick of a movement of extending my wrist on my left hand. And that was a sign that my brain had learned something from looking at the reflection of the non-affected hand in the mirror. And I find that this was very similar with the stroke survivors who I've coached personally. They also had a similar experience. And in saying that, it just goes to show that mirror box therapy, it can be used to give your brain the feedback it needs to actually teach itself how to connect the dots and send those signals from the brain to turn on the muscle. Where it fails, however, is in situations where if you're a stroke survivor and you're experiencing a lot of muscle tightness and your hand is brought up, mirror box therapy might not be for you because the muscle tightness or the muscle spasticity might stop you from benefiting from the mirror box therapy. And it's something you might have to overcome first before you do before you try doing mirror box therapy. And this can be overcome using something like electrical stimulation, which can also help address spasticity when it's used correctly. So those are two therapies which I'm a big advocate of. And I think that in every stroke survivor's journey after stroke, these two are worthwhile looking at. I mean, electrical stimulation is not for everyone, particularly if you have a heart condition and you have a pacemaker. But if you don't have a pacemaker, it's definitely worthwhile having a look at because of what I just said. And in that case, mirror box therapy could be an option for you in your recovery after stroke, and definitely worthwhile because, again, it's giving your brain the experience it needs to learn to get that neuroplasticity going and really learn how to connect those dots after stroke. So earlier, Ralph, you and I, we were having a discussion and we were talking about mirror therapy. And you mentioned that you had your own personal experiences in your journey about mirror therapy, and you actually made a discovery early on in your journey using mirrors in your own recovery. I was just wondering, do you want to share, I guess, your experience with the folks watching so they could benefit from your story?
Sure. I did, well, it's sometimes called mirror therapy, not mirror box therapy, but I prefer to use bilateral therapy because Well, we shouldn't have two things labeled mirror therapy because they can be easily confused. Let me just say a couple things first, and I'll talk about my experience. I run into several groups and I monitor a bunch more groups, and the things that I see in the group posts are about e-stim are that people confuse e-stim and TENS all the time. Nobody seems to know what kind of unit to get. People will post a unit that they have and everybody will say, oh, I need to get that one, I need to get that one. So there's a bunch of confusion there. The other thing that I see is an issue for it is, of course, you can talk to your therapist or your stroke coach or whoever about what kind of unit it is, and they can probably explain to you the difference between TENS and e-stim. I believe TENS is normally used for pain management. Anyway, the other thing that people have is a real stumbling block for people with e-stim is in terms of doing it themselves at home because they don't know where to put the pads. And I've heard tales of stroke survivors. One who had the therapist draw Sharpie marks on their arm where the pads went. And Sharpie won't wash off for a few weeks if you've ever had it on your body. It's pretty permanent. That seems kind of extreme, but it kind of points out the issue that pad placement is critical, and a lot of people have problems implementing it at home. At least they express that opinion or issue in the group. Mirror box therapy. Some people say it didn't work for me. I think no therapy works for everybody. So if something isn't working for you, you need to make that determination and maybe stop doing it. In the case of mirror box therapy, I think since it takes half an hour a day for months and months and months, there are a lot of people that just don't put in the time. They're not patient. And then they'll come in the groups and say, well, it didn't work for me. And, you don't know, but, you have a suspicion that maybe you didn't put in your time. Anyway, so those are two things. So bilateral therapy, which I've heard referred to as mirror therapy, is when you're using one side to mirror the other side. You're not fooling your brain. You're kind of using one side of your brain to help the other. So I didn't know anything about this at all. This is the truth. I actually figured this out sitting on my bed. When I take breaks between some of my other therapy, I'd sit on the edge of my bed and I'd try and roll my fingers. I wanted to be able to roll my fingers in both directions like I can here with my unaffected hand. Well, when I tried it with my affected hand, my fingers fired all crazy. So I said, well, that's not right. This hand can do it right. And I put this hand up and it did it perfectly. And I said, well, what happens if I do both? It wasn't perfect right away, but it was a lot better. It was noticeably better. So they would still fire a little crazy, but I could roll my fingers sort of. So what I would do would be roll them together 4 or 5 times. And then with my affected hand, well, right now I can do it. I mean, I trained myself to do it. So, but at the time I was recovering, I'd get 1 or 2 good ones and it'd fall apart. And what you do is you go back to patterning again, to doing them both. So I'd do like 5 patterning and I'd see how many I'd get. When it fell apart, do 5 more. You can do this with all kinds of things. I've actually demonstrated this before by doing this one. But there's all kinds of things that you can, different exercises you can do where you use one side. You mirror the motion with your unaffected side, and that's why they call it bilateral therapy. Also, your brain does, right side of your brain controls the left side of your body, left side the right side, left side of your brain, the right side of your body. However, there are some signals that are generated on the same side. So, so this type of patterning actually send some signals from the opposite side to the affected side. And I think it's about 15%. So that may be how it works. I'm not 100% sure of the science behind it in terms of explaining it here. But that worked pretty well for me with a number of things. Of course, I went and showed my physical therapist or occupational therapist at lunch a few months after I got released from the hospital. And I said, "You're not going to believe this. I figured this out in my bed." And she started looking at me funny. And she's the one who said, "When you get home, Ralph, Google mirror therapy." And I did, and I found both. And since then, I've kind of called it mirror box therapy or bilateral therapy. Another thing I did in my recovery was my version of CIMT, which is constraint-induced mirror therapy. And this is a concept of, William, if you want to explain this further, you can, but it's basically the concept of, you want to simplify it down to something really simple you can understand. It's the concept of putting an oven mitt. Some people say that they tied their hand behind their back. Their unaffected hand, there's working hand, there's strong hand. Now, this doesn't work a lot like mirror box therapy. It doesn't work if you have no motion at all in your hand. E-stim might be a better way to get things going than either of these two. But so in constraint-induced motion therapy, you immobilize the unaffected hand, and that forces you to use the affected hand. Like I said, if you have no motion at all, you're not going to be doing anything like picking up glasses or taking your pills or taking a drink of water or anything like that. But if you have some motion in your hand and you can grab a glass with your affected hand and tip it up, if you got some wrist control, it's a good way to kind of force yourself to use the affected hand. Now, I never got out the oven mitt. I never tied my hand behind my back. I just did it in my brain. I just all day long I thought about, okay, well, I did stuff like I would have two things in my hands, and I would put one away with my affected hand. Then I would take my affected hand, grab the other one, and put it away, rather than putting one away with this hand, one away with that hand. So I'd open the cabinet, and then I'd transfer from my unaffected hand and my affected hand, put the thing in the cabinet, close it with my affected hand. So just trying to do anything and everything you can. Open the refrigerator with your unaffected hand, transfer the pitcher or the bottle of juice or whatever you're putting back or getting in, do that with your affected hand, transfer it to your unaffected hand, close the refrigerator door. Once you got that, take it out of your unaffected hand, put it back in your affected hand to carry it. Just, you get the idea. Just I went out of my way like that to use that my affected left hand for anything and everything that I could. Now, it makes no sense to be constantly putting everything into that hand and holding it in another hand so you can open the cabinet. And in pre-stroke life, we didn't think about it. You just open the cabinet with one hand, throw it in, close it, don't even think about it. But I thought about it because what that did for me was all day long, I was, opening jars. That's a good one because you have to learn how to, and that's my affected hand. You have to learn how to do the unscrewing motion, which is complex because it involves the wrist and all the fingers. Hey, better get down. Had a little visitor there. So those are two things that I used a lot in my recovery. Did you have anything you wanted to add to CIMT, or you want to bring up another therapy, or should I keep talking?
Oh, that's all right. I mean, I can add. I mean, so speaking for myself, I I personally went through the Constraint-Induced Movement Therapy program. So everything that Ralph said is correct. And this is an alternative therapy approach, and it's really about forcing your brain to pay more attention to your affected side after stroke. Because a lot of you who are watching this, you might have heard of something called learnt not used, which is basically where you rely mainly on your stronger side to do everything. Now, constraint-induced movement therapy, right now, the eligibility criteria for that is quite high. So for a lot of stroke survivors, it's very difficult to get into. But that doesn't mean that you can't apply some of the concepts in that therapy to your own life. And mainly what constraint-induced movement therapy consists of is forcing yourself to use your affected hand in everyday tasks that you would typically do on a daily basis. So, for example, some of the things Ralph said, opening the refrigerator door with your affected hand, turning on and off taps with your affected hand, eating with your affected hand. Maybe it might mean eating half a plate of food with your non-affected hand, and then finishing the other half with your affected hand, just to get in that therapy. So basically what you're doing is you're maximizing your opportunities to give your brain therapy and build on those movements which it's already learnt by applying what your brain has already learnt in the clinic to real life. Because ultimately the goal in recovery is to apply whatever you've learnt from your other therapies, whether this be electrical stimulation or therapies you might have received through insurance, and then using these learnt movements in real life so that you can transition from doing therapy every day to having therapy be a natural part of your day, which is incorporated in the daily tasks which you do, which is something which you would have done before your stroke anyway. You never designated a time to specifically work on one movement unless you were maybe trying to practice for like a sport, or if you were a musician. In stroke recovery, it really comes down to how much you use your affected side, how much you're able to apply whatever your brain's learnt and make it relevant so that the recovery that you experience is permanent and your brain doesn't forget what it's already learnt. And like Ralph and I have said in the past, there's no such thing as set it and forget it. Whenever you learn something in recovery after stroke, you have to use it and apply it to your real life. And if you can apply it as soon as possible, then your brain is actually going to remember it, and it's likely that you won't be in a position where you have to keep doing the exact same exercise over and over again, because eventually, if you do the same exercise every single day, it's going to lead to a plateau. Speaking for myself, recovery is, I think it's a life process of just constantly refining what your brain has learnt and teaching your brain how to master those movements as close as possible to how you used to perform them before your stroke. Now, obviously, when you perform these movements in real life in high pressure situations, such as if you were washing the dishes with the help of your affected hand and your non-affected hand, obviously there's a lot of pressure there not to drop the plates, especially when you handle glassware. So that forces you to teach your brain to not send too many signals to turn on the muscles in your affected hand to stop yourself from breaking something, but to learn how to control and send those signals in a way such that you're able to perform movements in a controlled manner, such that you don't break any glassware or break any plates or make any mistakes when you're performing a task in your day-to-day life. So that's really the only thing I would add. I'm a huge advocate of constraint-induced movement therapy, and I know for myself, having gone through the program, that it is a lot of work, but the principles certainly are things that every stroke survivor can apply in their recovery, should they have the discipline to do so, because it is very much stroke recovery is very much a marathon, and it isn't a sprint. With everything Raf and I have mentioned in this discussion so far, the mirror therapy, electrical stimulation, all of these things, they're no overnight. They don't provide an overnight fix, but they're things which I personally would recommend that you do throughout your recovery, just to remind your brain how to send those signals. Mirror therapy is always good because you're using your non-affected hand to teach your brain how to refine those signals that it needs to send to the affected hand to do movements which you would have done before your stroke. And the same goes with electrical stimulation. You're targeting the exact same muscles which need to be turned on after your stroke, which you would have before your stroke, to do certain movements like you would have before your stroke. And you can use that as feedback to teach your brain how to become better at performing movements in your recovery after stroke. So that's really the only thing I have to add to everything that you said, Ralph. Other than that, I mean, I'll just pass it back to you. Did you have anything else you wanted to share with the folks watching?
Well, I mean, I got a big long list here of different type of alternative therapies. So maybe we'll move on and mention a couple more. Let's see. We mentioned I have no experience with HBOT or hyperbaric oxygen therapy. This is a concept where you go into hyperbaric oxygen chamber. It's what they use with divers who have suffered the bends. They put them in there and put them under pressure and then slowly release the pressure, because when you get the bends, you come up too fast. So they can reverse it that way. But basically, the concept with stroke is that if you're under pressure, it forces more oxygen to your brain, which promotes healing. If you look this up, they say it works for some people, and it's a supplemental therapy, not a game changer. When I look in the groups, a lot of people, well, the posts are about like, I'd love to try, but my insurance won't pay for it. It's expensive. Insurance often doesn't pay for it. It takes a while. It's not a couple of session things. So you have to make a commitment to doing it all the time, like Mirror Box. And if you're paying for it out of pocket, that can be pretty expensive. And in all the comments I've read a number of people who say that it did benefit them, but typically they will talk about anxiety, brain fog, neuro-fatigue, things like that, not anything movement-based. So that's what I know about HBOT. Let's see, moving on to acupuncture. If you look that up, it will say it's an acceptable supplementary therapy, but again, it's not like the main therapy or the game changer. A lot of these alternative therapies can and should be used in association with a regular home physical therapy program. Let's not forget to say that. I mean, you're not going to head off on HBOT or Mirror Box course and start ignoring your regular therapy. So a lot of these things can be brought in, and if they're work for you, then they can provide some supplemental therapy or some additional recovery. So I never had acupuncture, but most people report it doesn't work. If you look it up, it says it has some promise, but it's mostly supplemental. If you Google it and read a bunch of articles. I think the main problem is that most acupuncturists don't know much about stroke or the whole neural pathways thing. I did find a guy in Albuquerque, Dr. Jason Howe, who's been he and his wife revitalized ancient Chinese neuro acupuncture, which apparently had gotten forgotten for a while. And they're currently training a bunch of people around the United States. They've trained 200 or 300 acupuncturists in this neuro technique. So I think if you go to somebody like that, sort of like a physical therapist that knows a lot about stroke versus an orthopedic physical therapist, you're going to get more bang for your buck out of somebody that knows a bit about neuro. So let's see, chiropractic. If you look up chiropractic, it'll tell you that there are some things that are beneficial to stroke survivors in chiropractic. I would want to warn, I would think that anybody who had a carotid or vestibular artery dissection, the arteries that run up the back of your brain, you need to be very careful about getting adjusted, because you certainly wouldn't want to get your neck violently adjusted if you've already split and repaired one of those arteries. But how would you know it? I was going to say, or if you're subject to a carotid artery dissection, it's when the vein actually splits. And I've read posts from stroke survivors who said that it happened while they were weightlifting and other things. So, it's kind of like an AVM. If you're subject to having one of these veins split, then you wouldn't want to get your neck adjusted. But how would you know it? Just like an AVM, you wouldn't know that you've got a tangle in your head that could blow up on you. Now, I did go to a chiropractor after my stroke because I lived in a small town, and she had a really good reputation for working with people, including stroke survivors. But I don't believe she ever adjusted me in a traditional chiropractic sense. I also had a friend, Marcus, who one day I filmed him at the gym doing a bunch of different exercises. And then we went to his chiropractor, who he said was better than any physical therapist he'd ever had. And I videoed with him. And actually, the guy knew a lot about stroke, and he knew a lot about muscles and brain recovery and a lot of things. He impressed me. But again, there was no real adjustment. When people think about a chiropractor, they think about getting their back cracked. So I'll mention one more, and that's massage therapy, because I thought about it when I said get your back cracked. And I had a neuro massage therapist that I went to a couple of years ago, quite a few years post-stroke. And I felt it benefited me a lot, because it'd give me a deep massage, sometimes referred to as a Swedish massage, and he did a lot of realigning. So when I came out of there, I was not like chiropractic cracking or anything, but I felt like a lot of times I walked right out of there in my car pretty much perfectly, and I felt like I was standing up straight. Now, of course, it didn't last forever, but so those are 4 more therapies I know a little bit about that we've mentioned. Gosh, I've got a list here that's got about 15 more. Don't know. Maybe we'll have to do a part 2 on this, William, or just cover these main ones. What other alternative therapies do you know about, or have you used that we can talk about?
I mean, personally, I've gone through acupuncture before, and I did 6 months, and I found that there was no reasonable benefit. I think in terms of alternative therapies, yeah, I think I can only advocate the things which I've tried in my own recovery, and also in other stroke survivors who I've personally coached, which have shown some promise. And that's mainly mirror box therapy and the electrical stimulation therapy. I think obviously with all of these options that Ralph and I have shared with the folks watching today, that they won't all work for everyone, but they are handy to have in your toolbox as a stroke survivor as you're going through your recovery after stroke, because all of the ones we've shared, they're very low budget, and they are affordable, and it's worthwhile just giving them a try to see if you can get some benefit from them. I know for myself, speaking about mirror box therapy and electrical stimulation, I know for certain that when you do it correctly, there is a lot of benefit you can gain. And it's not very expensive at the same time. And especially if you're in a stage in your recovery where you've run out of insurance, and you feel like you're on your own, these options might be worth your while to have a look at and just experiment with, because it might just be the therapy which might push the needle forward in your recovery after stroke. I can't think of any other alternative therapies right now I would think that it's hard to share additional ones because every stroke survivor's recovery is different. And I think when it comes to alternative therapies, to each their own. I can only advocate the things which work personally for me, as well as the stroke survivors I've coached, and those are the ones which are worthwhile looking at. Well, actually, the other alternative therapy which I've had experience with in the past is gaming, or I guess you could call it virtual reality. So for those of you who might have heard of gaming therapy, it's basically where you perform exercise or stroke therapy in the form of playing a game. So right now there are some things you can buy on the market which provide things which could be beneficial for your recovery after stroke. For example, I'm not sure if they still sell it, but a long time ago, Nintendo, they had a gaming thing. It's called Nintendo Wii. And basically, the Nintendo Wii had a game which was called Wii Sports. And in that Wii Sports game, there was a game which was basically virtual tennis, where you could hold on to a remote with a sensor, and if you wanted to play virtual tennis, you would have to move the remote forward and backward. And this might be something which could help you mix up your therapy. Let's say if you're getting bored of doing the exact same exercise and you wanted to encourage yourself to do more exercise, you could put one of those controllers onto your affected hand, and you could practice swinging forward and backward, as if you're playing tennis. Another game on there which I had personal experience with was a balancing game, where you would be on a balance board which had sensors which could tell you which could sense how far you were leaning to one side contrary to the other. And I think that this could be worthwhile for stroke survivors who are looking to maybe explore another element which could help benefit them in their recovery. Let's say if you've been doing exercises to help teach your brain how to walk and regain your sense of balance, but you're looking for maybe something which might give you an extra edge. Having a look at gaming therapy, it could be worthwhile because you might get bored of going upstairs, so you could practice playing a game to see if you can maintain your balance long enough to be able to succeed in that game, and actually get a reward at the same time, because obviously you're not bored and you're doing therapy in a different environment. I think that gaming therapy, it has some promise because it gives your brain, again, another source of feedback which your brain needs to build up that blueprint and learn how to connect the dots after your stroke. So that's basically everything I have to add. I can't think of any at this point in time. In terms of alternative therapies, these are the ones I personally experienced, which have had some merit, which I can vouch for. Is there anything else you wanted to add, Ralph?
Yeah, I got a couple things. Yeah, we had a lot of promise. Don't hear much about it anymore. I think there are more 10 to 30-year-old boys in the world than stroke survivors, because Nintendo kind of dropped it right when it seemed to me it had a lot of promise. And there were a number of stroke survivors using it. I didn't know we were going to talk about it. I looked it up and see if you could still get one. I don't think you can get one unless you get it on eBay or somewhere like that. But did have a lot of promise, and a lot of people were using that balance board for stroke recovery, because it's not like a bongo board where you're actually on a roller and you can fall. It was a plate on the ground, so it would measure, it would measure without the danger. I have experience with a couple more that I would mention. There's going to be more virtual reality coming because a lot of places are doing it these days. I think people find that when they play games and stuff that they end up doing more therapy because you're distracted. You're involved in playing the game, and you don't know, you don't realize how much time you're putting in. But quickly, I had some experience with a couple things that are coming on. Well, one thing that's coming on, that's NMT, or neurological music therapy. And this is the brain. Music opens up the brain in a way that nothing else does. And it's being used for people with aphasia, who can often sing along when they can't talk. It's also being used in gait patterning. I personally tested the MedRhythm's Stride product, which is sensors that goes on your sneakers and measures your quality of your gait, and then adjusts the music speed accordingly. It's real interesting, and I found it to be fairly effective because you tend to listen to the music and not do all that overthinking. Okay, hang on. Got somebody who wants to offer an alternative therapy. So just quickly, without going into them, a couple of other things that I've done that I found beneficial were art therapy. Art and painting and drawing uses both sides of your brain. I know that you think of people as left-handed and right-brained as being creative, but art uses both sides of your brain. I've also done yoga for a couple of years, and I find that is really good for lengthening tendons, stretching, getting more range of motion. And then breathing. If you do some work on your breathing, then, well, my breath rate's gone down. There are a lot of people that think breathing's real helpful. And to that end, actually, we have a yoga class once a week and a breathing class once a week in Stroke Buddies, if people want to participate in them. Post links every week. So this has gone on a while, William. I've still got a few more on my list, but we covered a lot of them. Unless you've got something else, I would say let's end it here.
Yeah, no, I don't think I have anything else to add, Ralph, other than saying that everything that Ralph and I have discussed here for the folks watching, these are just all options to explore in your recovery after stroke. The ones I've shared are ones which I can personally advocate for, which I've seen and experienced benefits with, not just in my own recovery, but in stroke survivors I've coached personally. I would definitely recommend that you have a look at all of these options. Maybe look at the ones which you think would benefit your personal situation in your own recovery, and have a try them to see if you get some benefit. And if you do, and if you're lucky enough to see some benefit, then you know that then you know that maybe your brain is pointing you in the right direction, the path in terms of how it likes to learn and how it likes to connect the dots after stroke recovery. Could it be electrical stimulation? Could it be mirror therapy? You don't know until you actually try. So, I mean, that's really the only thing I'd have to add. But I'm pretty sure I've said that already. Other than that, I don't have anything else to add, Ralph. We've covered quite a lot tonight.
Okay, well, one thing you could do is, if you're still in physical therapy and you like your physical therapist, you could ask them about some of these alternative therapies, what they think about them in terms of your recovery, because they would know you more than William and I would know you, because we don't. The other thing is, like anything else in recovery or life, you have to pay attention to what's going on with your body and make the decision whether or not it's working. In the case of mirror box therapy, I'd say don't give up. Takes a while. So anyway, so that's it for this roadmap. And so, William, thank you for your time, and everybody out there, we'll see you next time.
Yeah, no problem, Ralph. Thank you.